We are very honored to have 4 panelists for our session today. Challenging Genocide Distortion. Famous Polish Jewish intellectual, publisher, writer, and journalist Konstanty Gebert, who wrote several books, including a new one on comparative genocide. And we are also very honored to have Mofidul Hoque, who is the founder trustee of a Bangladesh Liberation War Museum and center director of a Center for Study of Genocide and Justice of the Museum in Dhaka. And also Barbara Thimm, who is advisor at the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And also our friend and colleague Nickey Diamond, originally from Myanmar, who is a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Konstanz, Germany, and also a renowned Burmese human rights activist and advisor to Fortify Rights, who is in Germany now at the moment. So we are very honored to have this diverse group of panelists coming from different countries and also with different experiences and knowledge. So, and we will have 4 rounds, and we prepared 4 questions for our panelists, and each of them will have around 4-5 minutes to answer to each question. And then we can have also a discussion and Q&A session. And I would like to remind that everything what we are doing today, all our discussions, comments are important because we are going to publish, to have a public publication, and also at the end of the symposium and the project, and your remarks, your comments are very important. And let's start with the first question. First question, have you witnessed a case of genocide denial and or distortion in your work? And if yes, in what way can you give an example? And we would like to start and to ask Konstanty Gebert to start to answer. And my colleague will share the questions on the chat as well.
Thank you. And sadly, just very recently, there has been a very worrying example of genocide denial coming from the academic community. As some of you might know, the Republika Srpska, the Serb entity in post-war Bosnia, has set up an international inquiry committee to study the events in Srebrenica, which have been declared an act of genocide by the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. Unsurprisingly, the commission decided that there was no genocide at Srebrenica, that a number of Bosnians was killed and also a number of Serbians was killed. And in general, I mean, this is what you should expect when there is a war. Much more worryingly, the chairman of that commission is a highly respected Israeli historian, Professor Gideon Greif. And when the conclusions of the commission were criticized, including from Bosnia, Greif replied by saying that, well, this is Muslims attacking a Jewish scientist. And on top of that, that they come from a country that provided volunteers to the Nazis in World War II. This is totally unacceptable. First of all, one would assume that the ethnicity and religion of participants in academic debate is not an argument for or against. Using Greif's language, his critics might then say, well, this is a Jewish scientist who doesn't want to recognize a genocide committed against Muslims. What else would you expect? This kind of discourse in academic debate is totally unacceptable. Furthermore, as Professor Greif certainly knows, there was no country of Bosnia during World War II. The volunteers who did fight in the SS Handjar division were young men from what was then the independent state of Croatia. Bosnia came into being as a result of a referendum in 1992, almost half a century after the war. Now, all this would be aggravating and unacceptable, but much less worrying if Professor Greif were not a highly recognized and respected international scholar of the Shoah. He is a world-leading expert on the Sonderkommando in Auschwitz, and the person whose academic credentials are beyond challenge. And yet, for reasons that I refuse to speculate about, Professor Greif has decided to join into a very unseemly chorus of deniers of the Srebrenica genocide. Now, Professor Greif probably could make a legitimate argument saying that he simply defines genocide differently from the International Criminal Court, and therefore he is free to consider that Srebrenica was not a genocide. This is not what he said. He said there was no genocide in Srebrenica, period. Now, for an outsider trying to make an independent assessment of this situation, you have a highly and legitimately respected international scholar deciding that an issue on which most outsiders know little, the massacre in Srebrenica, that there was no genocide. It seems reasonable to follow the judgment of a highly accepted international scientist. And yet, Greif's opinion, and especially his response to his critics, is beyond obscene. And this shows just how highly and at times perversely politicized the issue of genocide study is, how dangerous can be the denial of genocide, especially when coming from academics, and how extremely careful all of us who study genocide should be when making statements about it.
Thank you very much. And now we would like to ask Mofidul Hoque to respond.
We can't hear you. On the mute. On the mute again. Switch your mic.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I think the question is relevant for every nation which went through this traumatic experience of genocide. And as Gregory Stanton in his 10 steps of genocide, he put denialism as the final stage of genocide. When you complete the atrocity and then you finish with your job, then you start denying genocide. And I think this is true for every post-conflict society. And for us, it is more painful because in 1971, during the 9 months of Liberation War, what the Pakistan Army did is one of the worst brutality in the post-World War II scenario. There were 10 million refugees who have taken shelter in India. There are exact figures of how many refugees settled in how many camps. And at that time, we have a population of 75 million. And during this 9 months, 3 million people perished in the black hole of genocide. It is difficult to get an exact count, and this number has become a point of contention by the denialists. But I think it is not the exactness of the number, but the pattern of the brutality, the atrocities that have been committed, and the victimization is very important. But in 1971, the Bangladesh genocide was widely reported in the global press. There were cries in many major cities that stop genocide, recognize Bangladesh. There was demonstration. There was also many reports published, including the famous report by Oxfam, Testimony of 60. And what happened after our victory is also then another tragedy followed, that Bangladesh at that time was on the wrong side of the Cold War rivalry, and the major Western power and also the United Nations did nothing at that time to stop genocide. On the other hand, the Western government supported the Pakistani military rulers, and there was also many protests for giving them arms when the genocide is ongoing, which has a similarity with the Rohingya situation we see today. And the world was also, after 1948, some scholars say it was 50 years of silence, almost 50 years, because the world reawakened with the genocide in former Yugoslavia, and also followed by Rwanda, and ICTY and ICTR was formed. But Bangladesh became a victim of silence, victim of oblivion, and it has fallen off the map of the global history of genocide of the 20th century. And we find that for the victims, for the survivors who went through this traumatic experience of genocide, it is another tragedy that when you find that your suffering is not getting the due recognition because of the many political situation or other factors involved in it. And Bangladesh in the post-independence period tried to raise the demand and also try to go to the United Nations. There was a commission formed by International Commission of Jurists. They made a report in May 1972, where they had recognized that genocide has been committed and the justice should prevail, and they were looking for the process to ensure justice. But it never found any recognition in the United Nations, and moreover, Bangladesh was not allowed to have their rightful seat in the United Nations, which is also like the Cambodian situation. And only in 1974, Bangladesh got entry after they have returned the 195 war criminals, the POWs of the Pakistan Military Command in eastern part, who have been accused of genocidal crime. Bangladesh tried to organize the trial on its own in the National Tribunal, but because of the strong international pressure, we could not continue with this process. So it was not only a denial, it was also a denial of victimization and also denial of justice. But we, the victim nation and also the people, continued their memorialization. And in many different ways, the memorialization process continued. And I think it is very important to have this process of memorialization through art, literature, memoirs, many kind of writings, films, theaters, and it gradually became a major demand for the nation. But globally, we find that when there are major academic works on genocide, especially in the post-Holocaust period, the academics usually jump after Holocaust, they jump to former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, and the genocide that is now continuing in different parts of the African and also in the Asian region. And this is very painful for us that, and we think that the Liberation War Museum, through its effort, is trying to highlight that. And we found good partners in the academic world. I will say that some of you have been to Bangladesh, and we expect that others will also be in Bangladesh. They take the experience of the place of occurrence and how the survivors also carry the memory, and how the memory we can try to make intergenerational. I think that is very important for every nation, victim nation of genocide, to keep the flame of memory burning and also to take it to the new generation, maybe third generation, fourth generation. And the denial came not only from Pakistani perpetrators, they all through this last 50 years now, as we are observing 50th anniversary of our genocide, there has been very little recognition, but there are civil society movements in Pakistan, not very strong, but they try to bring the truth to their people. And I think it is also very important to disseminate the message to continue the struggle. So we think that denial of genocide is not only a distortion of history, but it is also trampling of humanity. And it is we all together has to fight against it. And we have good partners. And I think this forum is also a recognition and a good partnership we will build in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite now Barbara Thimm from the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum in Phnom Penh.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me into this panel. I must say I always feel a bit uncomfortable to talk, to speak for Cambodia. I'm very much aware of my German background, working in Cambodia for the last 5 years at Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum. I would like to give 2 examples, and while I'm talking about the first, I would ask Natalia kindly to show us 1 photo. I'm sorry, this photo will show a difficult image. Please be aware. Oh, there it is already. Just a second. I'll bring first 1 example and then come to this one. Because, yeah, for sure, I will talk about Cambodia. And I think in Cambodia, the issue is not so much denial. I think there are two motivations which I find much more in a daily conversation. And the first example, what I want to give is, I love talking to the tuk-tuk drivers in front of the museum, because I think talking to them, I get to know what does like the average people think. And there you would hear very often that they say, well, we don't believe what they say in the museum. Why should Khmer people have killed Khmer people? I guess anybody who's a bit familiar with the Cambodian context would know this sentence. And I can hear this question only as a sentence of a rhetoric question, saying, well, this is so absurd to believe that Khmer people would have killed Khmer. Yeah, this can't be. So what they want to say, it must have been somebody else behind. And then what is normally meant is that it's either the blame is given to the Vietnamese or to the Chinese. This is the one thing we often find. Now, coming to this photo, it is showing a room in Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum. Sure, everybody of you might have visited our museum would remember one of these rooms. On the wall of this room, it was a former cell. You can't see well, but that's why I'm describing it. You see a photo of the situation in this room taken in January 79. Now, what was the fact in the last 30 years? This photo was placed in one of these rooms, but it was never checked if we would really be able to find the position of the cameraman in January 79. And so only 2 years ago we replaced the photos. And please show now the second photo, Natalia, if possible. Thank you. I hope everybody can see now this second photo. Now on this photo, you can see that we were able to place the photo which was taken in January 79 with a very, very difficult view to put it on the right position, because you can see that the bed is exactly the same, and you can see that the floor tiles on the photo, you might not see it good enough at the moment, so believe my explanation, please. On the photo, you can see the same floor tiles, which are in different colors, like in the situation today in the museum. Now, what I want to tell you 2 small stories. When we replaced these photos, we showed this new situation to several people. One of them was a representative of an NGO here in Cambodia working on the Khmer Rouge past. And when I walked with him towards that building, and I was explaining him what we did, he said, well, you must know we have some doubts. And I was saying, sorry, what kind of doubts? Yeah, we are not sure if these photos are correct, if these people really died in January 79 at this museum, at this prison, and so on. And this was said by a representative of a Cambodian NGO working on the Khmer Rouge. This is one example. And the other example, so this I would call a political motivated questioning of what was the truth of S21. So yeah, Sleng is the former S21 prison of the Khmer Rouge. And the second example I want to tell you is when we showed this replacing of the photo to our colleagues, and some of our colleagues have been working at Tuol Sleng since 30 years. One of the ladies turned around to me and said,
we don't hear, maybe
so
your camera.
this really happened here?
There is an interruption. Maybe you can switch off camera and talk.
And
it will be easier.
You can. Yes, I was really astonished by this question. Because this lady working at Sleng 30 years, now only seeing with her own eyes that these photos, which the same photo had been placed in the neighboring room for 30 years, but only now she could see with her own eyes that this photo was taken in. Even people working in would still have doubts about, and I think these two, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I changed the headset, so I hope this would work now. Yeah, I'm coming to an end. I just wanted to say, so these two motivations. So one politically motivated, not to believe or to blame others for what happened during 1975 and 79, or just to mistrust the information. This is, I think, much more common in Cambodia than denial. Thank you. Sorry for taking so long.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to ask our fourth panelist, Nickey Diamond, to give a question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalia, and thanks everyone for allowing me to participate in this very important discussion. And that questions is really important for my country, Myanmar. So denying, to me, the interpretation of denying is not only a societal problem, but also lack of international action against the genocide. I mean, in Myanmar, against genocide against the Rohingya. Also, I try to understand like this is a kind of denying as well, denial as well. So to me is, everybody know what's happening in the country, but they only say this and that, but not really concrete action against the perpetrator and not helping the victim survival. But so whatever the people get suffer, but the international community still debating. International community being a powerful nation, powerful state who have the ability to intervene in this situation. So for another point is when we talk about denial is, so I see the two point. One is military. So military is they are the perpetrator. So they are the major perpetrator who commissioned and who perpetrated the genocide in Myanmar. And also another point is civilian government, like Aung San Suu Kyi. So she have a moral authority, but herself defending for the perpetrator. So she have too much power, and her denial became a societal problem in Myanmar. So what I mean is, people. So she have a strong follower in the country, and whoever following her, whoever looking at her, and when she denied the fact that what happening in Rakhine, and then that's affected the whole society in the country in Myanmar. So that's kind of important, and also I see she trying to strengthen her political position by denying the reality in Rakhine. So that right now that resulted in, cultural impunity. Cultural impunity to me, impunity is a kind of, we have been dealing this issue, but cultural impunity to me is not, the impunity has been happening in the country for so many decades, and then we call the cultural impunity. And she ignored that kind of, cultural impunity in the country and try to defend the perpetrator, military. So it's become a problem for the whole country. And now I will feel the current military attempted coup in Myanmar is pretty much connected to the previous cultural impunity. So military have been doing all the human rights violation, all these international crime in the country with the full impunity and cultural impunity. And then now we face the result of that. So in last past 5 years, we have been, I'm one of the person who have been talking to the NLD government, focus on the transitional justice and so on. But at that time, the whole country in favor of the military, and everybody denying, almost all my friends denied the situation in Myanmar. And then right now, we are facing that kinds of consequences. So yeah, I'd like to end my answer here. Thanks.
So thank you very much, all panelists. So we can see that there are so many forms and strategies that deniers or distorters can use, from silencing, transfer of guilt, and many other. So each of you had kind of experience, yes, in different contexts with different examples. And actually, the second question is also connected with your work, and we'd like to learn from you. And do you see commonalities between the Holocaust and Shoah denial? Or better, I will share my screen. So, okay, so the second question. Do you see commonalities between Holocaust, Shoah denial, and denial of our genocides and atrocities in Europe and in Asia? And what is common between them? And what could be different? So, and perhaps we can start with Konstanty Gebert.
Thank you. Of course, I do see commonalities between the Shoah and other genocides, and to an extent in their denial, but there is a fundamental difference between the Shoah and all other genocides. The Shoah is the only example of a genocide that is being universally remembered the way its victims remember it. This has not happened in any other genocide. By and large, the Jewish memory of the Shoah has become the basis of the universal remembrance of it, and the Shoah is being universally seen as the archetypical genocide, the crime of crimes, and probably legitimately so. However, in no other case of genocide has this kind of universal recognition been achieved, nor are other genocides as well known and well studied and well taught as the Shoah is. Therefore, distorters or deniers of the Shoah, almost by definition, place themselves outside of rational discourse. They find themselves in the company of flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, other crusaders for unspeakable truths. But by and large, the general consensus is that denying the Shoah is simply intellectually not serious. In every other genocide, challenges to the veracity of the narrative are acceptable as a routine element of intellectual inquiry. This sets the Shoah aside and makes it more difficult to deny the Shoah than to deny or distort other genocides. On the other hand, the basic motivation of genocide deniers is usually contrary to what they claim, not an academic love of truth, but a political hatred of the victims of the genocide. And as anti-Semitism is much more popular worldwide than the hatred of the Rohingya or of the Tutsis or of the Roma or of the Armenians, then there is a much more welcoming audience worldwide to deniers and distorters of the Shoah than there is in the case of other genocides. Ultimately, the case of the Shoah gets universal attention. In the case of denial or distortion of any other genocide, it gets the attention of those who are already interested in the issue. So the public relevance and interest of debates surrounding the veracity or not of a genocide narrative will be different in the case of the Shoah and in the case of other genocides. And just as a footnote to that, it is obviously absolutely legitimate to continue with historical inquiry regarding genocides. In the case of the Shoah, for instance, for the post-war half-century, it was universally accepted that the number of the victims at the camp of Auschwitz was 4 million. And then historical research, independently by Polish and by Israeli historians, proved that this number has been widely inflated at the post-war trials, and that the real number of the victims of Auschwitz is 1.1 million. At the same time, and independently, it has been recognized that there were many more victims of what is now called the Shoah by bullets, executions, piecemeal, on territory occupied by the Germans, than the mass murders in death camps. This kind of revisions are extremely welcome. They bring us closer to the truth. They make us understand better what happened. So if somebody comes up with new ideas regarding what happened, this should be welcomed. This is the way historical knowledge progresses. What needs to be resisted, of course, is imposing a false narrative to replace the narrative based on the testimony of the victims. And as the victims of the Shoah by now have almost all passed away, their narrative has moved from the realm of memory to the realm of history. From something experienced, it has become a text that has to compete on the internet with other texts. Therefore, I'm not terribly optimistic about the unchallengeable quality of the Shoah narrative once the memory fades. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstanty. There are so many lessons we need to learn from the Holocaust, and lessons to learn what we learned from the Holocaust. And I would like now to ask Mofidul what you are doing in the Bangladeshi context at your museum. And the questions I will repeat again. Do you see commonalities between Holocaust Showa denial and denial of our genocides and atrocities in Europe and Asia? And what is common between them? And what could be different?
Yeah. I think what Konstanty Gebert has said is very important, that Holocaust has its impact on almost all countries of the world. In Bangladesh also, there were many Holocaust memoirs being translated. Also, even now we are having a good play being staged by a young girl on the Anna Frank story. She is of the same age, and this kind of affinity of the victims, I think, is very, very important. And the denial, what is now going on mostly in the European countries, has a political root, and it does not have much impact in our society. And also, I will say that right from the beginning in our struggle, the people found an affinity with the victimization of Holocaust, not, I mean, the intensity of that suffering and also the extreme brutality. I can cite some example. During in the heat of the struggle, there was a documentary made by a very leading filmmaker of our country, Zahir Raihan, and it is titled "Stop Genocide," and it was released in late August 1971 during the struggle, and it has many images from the Holocaust. And so we found that historically, when a nation became a victim, it finds solace in other victimization. And also we fought for a liberal, inclusive society. And Pakistan, because of the many political complications, it was established on the basis of the religious identity, and also highlighting the difference between Hindus and Muslims and other religions in the Indian subcontinent. But our struggle was that we as Bengalis, we may be Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, we all belong to the Bengali national identity. And I found it very interesting that when during the last days of the struggle, when India joined the war and the India-Bangladesh Joint Command was established, and from 3rd December, it was very quick military onslaught. On 16 December, we got our freedom. And the instrument of surrender was signed by the general from the Joint Command, General Jagjit Singh Arora, belonging to Eastern Command of India. He is a Sikh. And the Supreme Commander of the Indian Armed Force was General Sam Manekshaw. He is a Parsi. And the person who represented Bangladesh, Air Vice Marshal Khandukar, he is a Muslim. And the main planner and architect of this victory is an Indian general, General Jacob. He is a Jew. And I think this shows that how inclusive also the subcontinent, and also that emerged as the victorious over the forces of division and exclusivity. And so after independence, we also see that there are, in many cases, we try to also highlight the tragedy of the 20th century. We constructed a memorial site at a killing field, which was near the city of Dhaka. Now it is within the city. It is called Jallat Khana Killing Field, the butcher's den. And there are people who were taken there and murdered and put in a abandoned pit of a water pump. And in that memorial site, we also have cited the example of other genocides, beginning from the Armenian genocide, then also highlighting the Holocaust and mentioning the different concentration camps also, like Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Birkenau, and then continued with Bangladesh genocide and other genocides. So when we memorialize, we always find a common link. And I will say that the people in general, there is not much denialism of Holocaust in our country. There are also books being translated, works of Anna Frank, or many poems from the concentration camp, or many fiction being translated into Bengali. And also some globally acclaimed films also have made a big impact. So we do not know much about the commonality of the denialism, but we sometimes see that like what happened in Poland during the football match with the football player who was in South Africa, and also, I mean, a strong defender of apartheid. We also see sometime when there is a cricket being played between India, between Pakistan and Bangladesh, there are some groups who try to raise a different voice and try to render their support for the Pakistani cricket team from a political angle. And this kind of reflections we see in genocide denial. But within our country, it is more or less we received a consensus, a kind of universal values that we could claim that the nation inherited because of many factors. But globally, there are rise of new fanatic Islam, and they sometimes try to raise strong voice against, but that is more political, and that has linked with the Palestine problem or the problem of the State of Israel, but that does not turn into a denial of Holocaust or kind of hatred for a community. So I will say that we still carry on the liberal tradition, but we are afraid that globally we see a rise of rightist forces, rise of denialists in many different countries. And we think that we also have to build up a strong coalition of the victim nations. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the next panelist, Barbara Thimm from the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, or Nickey Diamond. And just to remind Nickey, to remind the question which I asked, do you think do you see commonalities between the Holocaust and Shoah denial and denial of our genocide and atrocities in Europe and Asia, and what can be common between them? What is different?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think from my understanding, the commonality, what I see is strategy and ideology. So that, I mean, based on the state media and based on the propaganda. So, I mean, in Myanmar, so military already power shared with the civilian elected government due to the 2008 constitution. And also they are very famous for the brainwashing and using the propaganda as a tool to make a kind of the hegemonic the whole society, the whole country. And that was fed by the state Councillor Daw San Suu Kyi, and that became a kind of strategy and ideology to combine, contributed to the denialism in Myanmar. So I see, like, I mean, what we talked about, the anti-range hate speech, anti-range hatred, but these kinds of the emotion have been manipulated by the propaganda machine and the state-owned media and different forms. I mean, one of the example is the Facebook, social media. I mean, giant Facebook began the hate speech in Myanmar and contributed to that kinds of instigation of the violence, I mean, genocide, and also supporting as a platform for the denial as well. So yeah, and also I would like to also give a kind of another point is I see the denying genocide in Myanmar is division of labor. So as a military perpetrator, they are the, I mean, real perpetrator who involved in the physical violence. But I mean, NLD and moral authority like Dawson Suji, you know, I mean, I feel like they don't give she didn't commission the real violence in Rakhine, but the regional leader to me is she involved in defending whitewashing all the crime committed by the military. So she's defending the military at the ICJ and so on. And also with international community criticizing what happened in Myanmar. So she's defending. For example, one case is when she had a conversation with the Vice President Mike Pence. She said like, nobody knows my country. I mean, I'm the only one who knows my country better than anyone. So that kinds of discourse and also that kinds of criticism against any country, anyone talking about the genocide in Myanmar, so contributed to the. I see like that's a kind of commonality, like whoever denying in the past genocide and also contemporary genocide in Myanmar as well.
Thank you very much, Nickey. And I would like now to invite Barbara to respond from Tuol Sleng from Phnom Penh. So we have some technical issues, I guess. Okay, so maybe Barbara has some issues, technical issues now, so maybe we can continue and she will join us for the next round. So, and I would start with, we already mentioned something, as from my own experience, personal experience, as a person who's someone who is working with the Holocaust, but also trying to relate and to work with other genocides. And the next question is connected. And I will share my screen so everyone can see the question. So, and there is a kind of challenge, always a problem. Do you think it's useful to refer to the Holocaust Shoah when we're discussing other genocides and crimes against humanity, intercultural context? Yes, it's important, but how it can be done without trivializing and relativizing the Holocaust Shoah and other genocide? How to be more sensitive discussing it and to avoid trivialization or other distortions. So, and I would like to invite Konstanty Gebert to respond first.
Thank you. These are two separate questions. It is obvious that we need to compare. Science is built on comparisons. If there is a unique event which cannot be compared with anything else, then it cannot be scientifically studied, because we do not know what are its specific qualities, what are its connections with the rest of the universe or the universe of human experience. So obviously, if we want to study genocide, we need to compare. But there is another reason why we need to compare. If we say that the Shoah is unique and incomprehensible, this was the position taken, for example, by Elie Wiesel, somebody whom I immensely admire, as I'm sure many other people in this discussion do. But on this, I disagree with. The reason why I disagree, apart from the rational argument given earlier, is that if we say that the Shoah cannot be compared or comprehended, we relegate all those involved into a separate moral universe. If we say that, what we're really saying is they're not us. And therefore, we do not need to challenge ourselves in the light of their experience. I believe we do. I believe we need to accept a historical perspective in which any of us could be victims or perpetrators or bystanders to a genocide. We cannot allow ourselves the luxury of indifference. It concerns us. So for those two reasons, I think that comparison is necessary and desirable. But obviously, when you compare, there is a tendency to forget about the individuality of each event which is being compared and just look at the commonalities. And then, yes, there is the risk of trivialization and banalization of the horrors we're speaking of, be it the Shoah, be it any other genocide. Which is why I believe that on a purely semantical level, it is so very useful to ascribe a different name to each of the genocides we're studying. The Shoah has a name. The Shoah of the Rama and Sinti has its own name, the Paraimos. The Armenian genocide has a name, the Medziegan. And when we attribute or recognize a proper name given to the event, we recognize, by the same token, that we are not speaking only about the umpteenth example of something overriding, but we are describing a separate phenomenon. The way that when test participant number 73 becomes John Smith, we tend to treat him differently. So obviously, we are obliged as researchers and as human beings to treat genocides and their victims with the utmost respect, to be extremely careful of anything that might trivialize or banalize the ultimate horror they've experienced. And yet, at the same time, we need to compare these horrors to other horrors, because if we do not only we cannot comprehend, but we deny the victims our basic solidarity as human beings, all involved in a similar or potentially similar experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstanty, for your response. And I see that Barbara Thimm from the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum is back, and I hope that the technical issues are resolved now.
I hope so too, yeah.
Yes, so, and probably you can also share your experience. We were discussing the third question. Do you refer maybe to the Holocaust to Shoah when discussing other genocide, or in your work at the Tuol Sleng Museum when you discuss Cambodian genocide, and how it can be done without trivializing or relativizing, distorting Holocaust, Shoah, and other genocides? Do you have your own maybe way how to deliver this message, share this message in Cambodia, in the Cambodian context?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll try to answer to question 2 and 3 together, because for me it is the question about commonalities or differences is, for me, the more important question is the motivation behind, because I would say, yes, we find the full range of denial, distortion, justification, identification, and so on. And you will, in different countries, you will have different levels. And as I said, in Cambodia, I think distortion in the sense of to excuse, to minimize, to misrepresent is the more common version. For me, it's more important to look at the motivation behind. Why does somebody deny or does want to reinterpret the history or show it in a different way? And there you will find a lot of similarities. Why does he? So sometimes it is simply missing knowledge. Sometimes it is the inability to include this historical facts into your personal or your historical narrative. Sometimes it is politically motivated and so on. And the same I would, or in a similar way, I would answer to the third question. So the question of, is it useful to refer to the Holocaust? I would say sure, but again, because are you doing it I'm comparing is what legitimate, but the question is yeah, why are we referring to, and so do we do it to reach a deeper understanding or to minimize another experience? And that's what we always need to be always very careful of. That's the main thing I want to say, to check our own motivation. We add to historical knowledge, sure. The more we know from each other, and this is a main experience in Cambodia. Many Cambodians would not know much, from my experience, about other genocides and the Holocaust. And when they get to know more, one very important and yeah, kind of touching experience is that they have the feeling it's good to know that it's not something like that did not only happen to them, and that obviously makes it easier to deal with it and to get into communication with the world and to try to understand why these kind of things could happen to their own country and in other countries. And so just one more remark. So I'm sorry, I missed a big part. What you said, I heard that you, Konstanty Gebert, said that the remembrance of the Holocaust got universal. Being now quite some years in Asia, I would put it a little bit different, because I've seen now so much, yeah, that not much is known about the Holocaust. But what the Shoah did was that the dealing with the Shoah created the term genocide. And so this term genocide, this got definitely universally known and referred to. So, and we all know that a mass crime in the world is only recognized when it is labeled as genocide. And that's why this term got so prominent and got so problematic, and why we are all of us are discussing about this term, and countries are asking to be labeled that a mass atrocity is labeled like that, simply to be recognized in the world and to be seen with their own experience. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question.
Thank you for your observations. I think we can still also, we will still have some time to discuss also Cambodia. Later we'll have some participants who could probably also share their experience of, for example, translation of Anna Frank and delivering this to Cambodia. So it would be interesting to hear also and to discuss it later. And I would like now to kindly ask Mofidul Hoque from the Bangladesh Liberation Museum to share, to answer the same questions in your context, in Bangladesh context. Unmute.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I think what Konstanty Gebert has said, that a coalition of humanity of the victims, that is very important. And as a victim nation, there are affinity or there are references that is being drawn in many different ways with the experience of Holocaust. And two main areas now, I think, where we have to learn from the post-conflict scenario of Holocaust is, one is the justice process, which as we also initiated our own justice process after long struggle of 40 years in the court, also outside the court, there were many references with the justice process that the allied forces and the global community could impose on the perpetrators. And another important thing is the psyche of the perpetrators. I think this is also a very important area where references made in many ways with the perpetrators of the Holocaust, and also different cases come up in different scenario. We recently have an exhibition we hosted in our museum by photographs by Marc Ribou, the very famous French photographer, who also captured the last days of our liberation struggle with this atrocity victory in November, December. And in that exhibition, we also put about his experience of meeting Klaus Barbie in the court. He was in the resistance and he knew about the victims. And so it was very difficult moment. And also that he found that Klaus Barbie otherwise looked a common gentleman. And that is also when the Eichmann trial also made an impact in our country, and there were references in some poems about his personality and also how he was part of the brutality. And I think that's an important question, which always one has to refer to the past experience, and especially Holocaust. And also Holocaust victims, survivors inspire people in many ways. I can cite one example of a girl aged 5 or 6. She had a very traumatic experience of her father brutally murdered. Then the family had to move from one village to another. Then in one time they were attacked by the local collaborators with the Pakistani military, and few members of their family was also brutally murdered. And then she grew up, she had a education, and she was in Sweden studying and working. And she was always thinking that how she can recollect her memory, which is not a full memory, which is a broken memory. And she was working at an old people's home, and where there was a genocide survivor, an old lady who survived from the concentration camp. And her experience of serving this survivor, the lady, and the conversation they have inspired her to write her own memoir. And that is one of the very powerful book that we got. And so inspiration is from a Holocaust survivor. And in many other way, I think there is a commonality among the victims and survivors, and also those who want to confront genocide and learn the lessons from the past genocide. So comparison will always be there, references will be made, comparative study will also should be welcome. And these are not trivializing or making a relativism. I think that comes from the genocide denial. They will always try to put one genocide maybe in such a comparison, but I think for a victim nation, for survivors, they always look for the healing process, learning about the suffering of the other people in other time, in other place, but they find their own commonality. So I think that the more we work on such memorization and bring the experience of one nation to other, the more we can take a proper perspective. And victims always show us the real path. Denialists are their own political motive and agenda. And sometimes it is very crude, raising some conspiracy theory, Jewish conspiracy to control the world or others. It has nothing to do with the academic or historical study. So we think that this process we should always try to strengthen whatever way we can. And I would say that Anna Frank is a all-time bestseller, and there are more than 5-6 translations made. And many of one of our leading poets has done a great translation of Anna Frank diary. And younger girls especially, know about her name, and we in the Liberation War Museum, in collaboration with the Anne Frank House in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, we also mount an annual exhibition every year in our museum, which was stopped for last 2 years, but we will continue with that. So I think affinity, comparison, reference should always be welcome.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite our friend and colleague Nickey Diamond from Myanmar, who is working on hate speech against Muslims in Myanmar and against Rohingya. But at the same time, Nickey visited us in Poland, and he visited the Jewish Museum. So we had a guided tour, and we discussed also the Holocaust and Jewish life in Poland pre-war. So, so you have this experience also in Poland. So how you will respond to this question? And again, I will repeat the question. If you do you think it's useful to refer to the Holocaust shower when discussing other genocide crimes against humanity in your context, what you are working in your work, and how it can be done without trivializing and without banalization or without distortion the Holocaust shower, but also other genocides? So please share with us your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is a very important question to me, because sometimes whenever I talk to the victims of genocide in Myanmar, so I already experience, I already understand their suffering. Sometimes, I mean, we cannot compare the level or degree of their suffering. So comparing genocide, I mean, is important, but not like comparing like who God suffer more or less, you know. But I mean, the thing is like, I think to me, every genocide, I mean, is a kind of power abuse, and the people in power trying to manipulate their follower, or I mean, their fellow citizen to violate and participate in some certain will, and then so a kind of precondition happen before the real killing and extension of real killing. So I mean, these people in power, in the case of Myanmar, like a political leader or religious leader, so they manipulate and they try to collaborate with the propaganda machine and try to promote or manipulate hatred against some certain minority group. So in this sense, I mean, I'm not favor of promoting the comparison of the suffering, but history is a kind of what we can learn from the history. I mean, history is lesson learned. So some of my colleagues already talked about the lack of education in Myanmar contributed to the misunderstanding of, not proper understanding of Holocaust. That so a lot of people enjoy, participating in the propaganda, and also enjoying sharing the hate speech of hatred on the social media. So sometimes their ignorance and lack of education, lack of their awareness somehow contributed to in that kind of situation. So I mean, if we have education, Holocaust history, and that kind of education and lesson in our curriculum, so will contribute to the much more, preventive measure preventive measure for the genocide prevention. So that's why one of the colleagues, Ronald Lee, talked about the NUG. National unity government should or have to recognize what happened in the past, and also introduce the curriculum for the whole country, and then that will be able to help enable for the prevention. So sometimes I feel like the denying also, in the past, NLD and all these people involved in the denying of the Rohingya genocide. But right now, a kind of new realization happened, and people now realize what happened to the Rohingya because of the military brutal crack down against the current unarmed protester and peaceful protester in the country. So all their actions, military actions in the past and the current. So I don't want to say this, but in the past, I'm the one of the guy who talked to the government for the human rights, defending the minority rights in the country. At the time, only a few people listened to me. But right now, what military contributed to this situation is now everybody understands the human rights, the life, right to life, So when people suffer, and then now their realization is increased. I don't want to say that, but the current situation is that kind of situation in the country. So, yeah, to conclude my comment, comparison should be focusing on more, preventive measure. So if we have a holistic understanding of the past and what contributed to genocide, and that kinds of the comparison, that kinds of theory will contribute to the future genocide, prevention. So, yeah, my final word is prevention is a kind of must for our everyone on this this wall. So, but what I realized is we fail to prevent genocide. Throughout our history. So that's the reality. To overcome that reality, we must have a better education, better lesson in our curriculum, and then we'll promote, future preventing genocide. Yeah.
Thank you, Nickey. Thank you very much, and all the panelists. And the third question, I think it's very important. Before we will open floor for a more broader discussion. So the last question, what do you consider as most effective strategies against genocide denial and distortion? Legal, educational, documentation of evidence, museum work, or others? And what will be the most effective strategy, and what can be the arguments against denial and distortion? And I'd like to start with Konstanty Gebert, please.
Thank you. Sadly, I'm not convinced that any strategy is effective. The denial and distortion of genocide will, I think, remain part of the public discourse. What we can try to do is limit its noxious impact. And from that point of view, probably all of the methods that you have mentioned in your question play their role, and all of them have their own problems. The legal prosecution of genocide denial is very uneven and unequal in different countries. In many European countries, denying the Shoah is a criminal offense, but this does not apply to other genocides. Furthermore, the idea of prosecuting people for denying a historical event has already been creatively employed by non-democratic governments, such as the Russian government, which has made it a criminal offense to criticize the role that Russia played in World War II, like reminding its alliance with Hitler in the first 2 years of the war. So it might well turn out that legal prosecution might be overall more damaging to the interests of historical truth than protective of it. Education, we tend to believe that education is the panacea, is the ultimate method to prevent people from saying and doing evil things. This is based on what I believe is to be an Enlightenment illusion that says that if people do wrong, it's because they do not know what is right. I think that most Holocaust deniers, most genocide deniers, definitely know that what they're doing is wrong, but they do it in order to do something that they think is right, which is hurt the victims. They hate the victims, and therefore they want to hurt them, and they know that by denying the reality of their suffering, they will inflict on them psychological damage incomparable to any other. I'm not terribly sure that educating them that hurting people is a bad thing would change much in this situation. The problem with museums, of course, is that the very existence of a museum is already a message. We go to museums as to safe places where we can visit the past. If something is in a museum, almost by definition, it's not part of our reality. It's something that happened. The problem with genocide is that it's never over. Therefore, when we make museums of genocide, we tend to produce a falsely calming effect, because visitors will say, well, it was horrible, but it was over. And the best proof is they made a museum to educate us about it. I don't think we're safe from genocide. And I don't feel safe with the kind of safety message that museums tend to send. So ultimately, I believe that we are doomed to face genocide distortion and genocide denial as a part of public discourse. And the best we can do is to try to limit the damage that those phenomena inflict, both on victims and on everybody else, by subverting the historical truth without falling into the lyrical trap that we can eliminate evil. At the best, we can try to contain it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have two museum representatives also. I'd like to ask Barbara to respond as a second analyst.
Yeah, thank you. I must say I can only follow on same lines of being very skeptical, like what we just heard from you, Konstanty Gebert. And I think part of it is that we seem to believe that working against denial is at the same time hoping that we do something for non-recurrence. And this, I don't believe that this is going to so close together. Sure, this is what we hope, but I fully agree. Yes, and working at a museum, that you can have museums in a country and genocide can happen in the same country. This is nothing what will really prevent us from genocide. At the same time, yes, sure, working at Sleng Genocide Museum and before at Buchenwald and Dachau in Germany, at least I strongly believe that something very, very important is to document the evidence, because only the historical sites and the historical documents are our strongest, let me choose the word weapon, against denial and against those people who say this was all fabrication, either by the Americans or fabrication by the Vietnamese or wherever you are in the world. So the historical sites are of extreme importance, but at the same time, these museums as such are nothing if you don't have the knowledge at place, and if you don't. So what I learned in Germany was, or in Buchenwald, the term memory needs knowledge was like chosen as a motto. And so I'm realizing now here in Cambodia, if we don't really have the knowledge in the team of the museum, what happened in S21, so that we can share it and share it in a way that students get interested in it. So I would add to having the knowledge, I would add that the education, the way how we are talking about history must be inviting, must be participatory, must be in a way that we are not lecturing young people, but that we make them interested in this history and not this is a really, really difficult history we have to share, but still the way how you do it is you can either frighten people and make them not want to come again, or you talk to them in a way that you are interested in their view on this history and how we are dealing it together with this history, because these young people will be the next generation, how to deal with it and so on. So yeah, sure. It's not a surprise that coming from a museum, I'm strengthening this part. Yes, but sure, the legal part is very important for really strong deniers. I think there's no other way. Yeah, that's it for the moment. We can talk more in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And now we are going back to Mofidul Hoque from the Liberation War Museum, please.
Well, we can share our experience where we have to face the official distortion of history, denial of history, and immediately after our victory in December 1971, Bangladesh emerged as an independent country, but it was a devastated land, and we also started almost like from ground zero. And in 1975, the founding father of the nation and who led the struggle, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, he was brutally murdered along with his family members, and the military took power, and the perpetrators of genocide became part of the ruling coterie. And so there was a long period of denial and distortion. And the nation has to go through this another traumatic experience. And the museum was established in 1996, 25 years after our independence, when we found that there has not been much effort made to collect, conserve, and present the memories of past history. So we made a call to the community that we want to do it from a neutral position, and we want to highlight the people's participation in the whole struggle and the suffering and atrocity they went through. So it started as a small museum at a rented house, but we were overwhelmed by the support we got from the community. And we also feel it very strongly that since 1975, and we started in 1996, in that time, when there was an official negation of history and denial and distortion, the main strength was memory. People were carrying their memory and also trying to do whatever way they can to transmit this memory to others. And one of the major upsides, I would say, we have seen that there are a lot of memoirs being written, and that memoirs become very popular with the readers. And among the important memoirs, we also find that memoirs written by the women has a greater attraction and power. And there are many women who become nationally known and respected because of their memoirs they have written of their family, their suffering during the 9 months time. There were also films, theater being produced, documentary films being made. So art, and that is also in one way, we can say the memorialization. So when we lost everything, nobody could snatch the memory from the heart of the people. And I think that's the main strength of whatever you want to confront the denial and distortion. It is the memory and the memorialization. There was, in many small way, community memorialized, maybe with a humble just a construction or some kind of public art or some other way. So the people never allowed their memory to be forfeited and also their right to justice. So these two things went together, and I think the other things follow. And also to confront, we think that it has to be a holistic approach. You have to embrace the educational system, the museumization, many other way, legal way. But when you have nothing, then you have the memory. So we, from our museum, found that this is the greatest strength, that almost every family suffered during the 9-month-long atrocity. So every family has a story to tell, has something to narrate. So we have an oral history program where we try to engage the younger generation to interview their senior people and write it down and send it to our museum, which is now a nationwide, we have a nationwide spread, and many human stories we could accumulate. And also through the museum, we could reflect the people's voice and stories. And I think that creates a bondage to the visitor, and especially with the visitor of the new generation. So now we are in a better situation. The government is also now taking various programs for reform of education. The justice system, justice has been imposed and the trial is going on. There are a lot of support from the government, and we could build up a permanent museum with support from the government and also from the community. So we will say that our journey has shown us that memory is the strength and community is the power. And if we can integrate those in any kind of effort, and we think that efforts, there is no particular prescription or solution, but it has to be a very holistic effort, and it has to address now, since atrocity happened 50 years ago, it is very important to reach out to the younger generation with their hopes and aspirations in their own way. And we think that engaging new generation into the memorialization process can create a new dimension. So we think that a victim nation has great strength in their victimization, in their suffering, and that gives us the strength to stand up and carry on the struggle and also learn lessons from the past, so that we are facing many onslaught. The religious fundamentalism has made many brutal attack against many cultural manifestation or liberal artists or academics, and it's not an easy struggle. So we are in the thick of the struggle, but we feel that history is on our side and memory is our power and strength.
Thank you very much. I see that we are out of time, but we can maybe stay some minutes longer if possible, because we started earlier. And Nickey, maybe you can respond very quickly, please.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Yeah, I can still very briefly and very short. So my background is from the documenting human rights violation in Myanmar. So I'm really in favor of seeking justice or accountability for Rohingya. So without ending impunity in the country, so we cannot move forward. So it doesn't mean, education and memorializations are not important. So I mean, to move forward, to bring lessons and curriculum in our education, first thing is we must show no one should get away with genocide. So that should be a kind of idea to end impunity in Myanmar, in the case of Myanmar. So without ending impunity, so I mean, genocide perpetrator getting smarter and smarter, in the past and the contemporary, so they are getting smarter and they know how to. For example, I mean, in the case of Myanmar, so they defend the genocide, agreeing, violation of crime against humanity and war crime. So that kinds of, I mean, legal issue, also, providing a space, providing an opportunity for them to deny and deal to get away with the genocide. So to me, ending impunity, I mean, seeking justice and accountability is important, and then they can move with the education and memorialization and building a museum and working on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nickey. I see that there are several questions and or comments in the chat, and I can just read it. Thank you so much, Ms. Barbara Thimm, for your concern in studying about Cambodian genocide, especially Tuol Sleng Center. But the question is, who is really behind this genocide? This is from Kimi Kiat. I don't know if you want to respond to this question. And the second is, it seems that governments from Arnik Tampoy, I'm sorry for pronunciation, it seems that governments who experience or instigated genocide create narrative of denial and legitimize these atrocities to their benefits. How can people assert for legislation that will safeguard minorities and disadvantaged groups against genocidal tendencies of some governments? So I would like to ask the panelists who would like to respond maybe, or comment or reflect on this question. So.
Well, I can shortly answer to the first question. I'm not so sure if I 100% interpreted it right. Yeah, there was nobody behind the Cambodian mass atrocities. Pol Pot and his committee were all Cambodians. They were, the other question, by whom were they influenced? That's another question. But if the question is somebody behind, then I can only say no.
And I would like to ask also our panelists, because I don't see any other questions in the chat. Maybe someone still would like to ask something, so we'll use the last opportunity. So after all our discussion, what the questions I asked you, perhaps you'd like to reflect on all these discussions and to say some last words. We will start maybe with Mofidul, please.
Well, I think the ongoing Rohingya genocide has linked with the Bangladesh genocide of 1971, and our nation is standing with the Rohingya refugees, and because of our past experience also that we were refugees in 1971, and also the issue of justice is very important, and especially important for the ongoing genocide. For us, during the 9 months long genocidal brutality, there was no step taken by the international community for justice, but there was demand raised both nationally and by the civil society. And with the Rohingya issue, I think it is quite interesting that ICJ and ICC has taken up the case. And ICC has taken up the case because Bangladesh is a signatory to the Rome Statute. Myanmar is not. But they made a interesting observation that since Bangladesh is a signatory and the Rohingyas were attacked and pushed into the territory of Bangladesh, so Bangladesh has become part of the place of occurrence, and so they can take up the case. So I think it is very important to stand behind the justice process very strongly. And we also found that we have to struggle for justice also, but memory also has given us the strength to carry forward that struggle, and took us almost 40 years to bring the local collaborators and perpetrators on the trial. But we still have the major war criminals, the Pakistani executors of genocidal brutality. They are outside of our jurisdiction. But I think here also there is a juridical question that how you address the past genocide which happened before the Rome Statute was adopted. So ICC will not go for post facto justice, but society and international community needs to impose justice and end the impunity. So there are many questions with the genocide, and also I think it is also very important, but not addressed much, is the politics of genocide. who was behind the Pol Pot regime. It was Cold War scenario, and there were others who actually has stood behind them. Genocide does not happen in vacuum. That is also true for the genocide of Bangladesh and also for Rohingya genocide. So I think this is also important to understand the politics of genocide, the power play. And so we still have to learn a lot from the past experience and also the ongoing genocidal brutality, which is so unfortunate, but we need to take up more action and more determined steps.
Yes, and thank you very much. And I think also the responsibility, the question is responsibility is also very important as we are talking about genocide. So, so not only think about saying that someone is, but also to think about our own society. And maybe I'm sharing my own experience as someone coming from Eastern Europe, where we have these difficult debates about past, about the role which people in Eastern Europe played, individuals during, for example, the Holocaust, because there were different roles, collaborators, upstanders, bystanders, majority. So, and I think it's also important to think and critically assess yourself, you know, and not only about others. So, but it's a very complex and difficult, I think, discussion. And so I would like to ask our panelists if you would like also to comment and add something. Barbara?
Yeah, I just wanted, as an educator, I just want to make the one remark that I think we need to go beyond always saying we have to learn from the past and or draw lessons from the past, and need to be more precise, because we are not going to convince young people or same age people or whoever by always repeating this. But not saying what do we mean by that. And I'm now finding different answers in different countries. One country would say, yes, for us it means democracy, for others it means peace, or for others another answer. But then again, what do we mean by that, and how do we really want to achieve a country which is more, where the minorities or whoever group is more secure than before, and how precisely do we want to achieve that? And if we can't answer that question, we can't be convincing in our attempt.
Just to follow up on Barbara, if I may, Natalia.
Yes. I just wanted to leave a brief comment on the chat from Sharon Dua. I'm a survivor for Cambodia genocide, and I believe it was, yes, and I'm believing witness to the situation. I saw it and I'm asking for justice to my people. The outside world couldn't see it. So we have this comment. So yes, please, Konstanty.
Yes, I'd just like to follow up on Barbara's very important comments. And I think that the answer to the question you raise is not talking, but doing. And I'd like to bring a very simple example. In Milan, in northern Italy, there is a Holocaust memorial on the railroad station at track 21, which was the track that was used under the German occupation to send off trains of Italian Jews to Auschwitz. And after very many years, the Italian railroads agreed to allow the Jewish community to set up a memorial at track 21, and it was what you would usually expect. There was a railroad car, there were photographs, there were recorded testimonies, the stuff that you always find at this kind of educational institutions. The one strange thing that was there was a huge sculpture standing on the railroad track. It was a three-dimensional representation of just one word, and that word was indifference. Because as Liliana Segre, a survivor, an Italian Jewish survivor of Auschwitz, had said, what sent us away to Auschwitz was not hatred, it was indifference. The hatred would not have been enough. And at the heyday of the migration crisis in 2015, if you would visit that particular center, at the time it closes at 7 p.m., you'd see some strange activities as visitors were escorted out, volunteers would show up and pull out beds and tables because the Shoah Memorial would transform for the night into a reception center for refugees. And this was done at the insistence of the survivors, against some skepticism in the Jewish community. And eventually, since most of the refugees were Muslims, this center was run conjointly by the Jewish community and the Muslim charity. And I'm pretty sure that the people who found the bed for the night there at that center had no idea where they are. And it doesn't matter, because the practical educational lesson that went beyond the help that was given to, over time, 8,500 people there at the center. But the message to everybody was, we refuse to be indifferent. And I believe that in this sense, this was a much more powerful educational experience than if they had built a huge museum on the spot that would attract 1 million visitors per year. Because ultimately, really, it is the doing, it's not the talking.
Any other reflections from the panelists? Mofidul, Nickey?
Well, I think this is a great example, and as Barbara has said, it is not only you learn from the past, but what is the lesson? For us, we found that it is very important to promote the liberal values and also the religious, how we accommodate the religious diversity. And we think that our history has shows that you must respect the otherness of other people. And so the pluralism, the diversity, and respect for otherness. These are the lessons we also try to promote this through. But it is very important how in practical way you transform that as an educational exercise. That is important. And I think creativity is very essential component of that. What Konstanty Gebert has said is the great creativity, and it's also bringing the community together. And this, I think, respect for diversity and inclusivity is the most important lesson we need to promote. And this is also, we think that when we talk about the lessons from the past, we go beyond the two-nation theory, which divided the Indian subcontinent, that Hindu Muslims are different and belong to two nations. We work for ethnic, national, linguistic identity and work great inspiration from our language struggle. International Mother Language Day now, 21st February, is recognized by UNESCO. And so we continue our struggle, but I think we all have to learn from each other. That's very important. And I found this panel very fascinating for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I thought that Sayana wanted to say something briefly from Cambodia. Half a minute, if you'd like. Or you raised your hand, so very briefly.
Yes, it was. Thank you, Natalie. I was want to respond to the first question, like by the Kimi Kiet. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I just like to add to Barbara and Professor Konstanty and other panelists that have shared on this. But I mean, there are so many questions on this. Like when I conducted outreach with the student outreach several years ago, And Cambodian people normally they still believe it's very unbelievable that Khmer kill their own people, and so people keep like maybe they find the reason of to believe that it's the others from the outsider, even say like maybe from Thai, but mostly Vietnamese and Chinese. But I think if it's more on this, there is a gap in this kind of outreach and education, and also on the critical discourse analysis, and that's why the effort of the NGO should be focused more on this kind of education and outreach program. And also to, especially like with the ECC, that we also have the Cambodian, the hybrid tribunal. So that's how to find the truth and justice. I think it's also play important role in the legal system in Cambodia, how to find justice and the truth about this, and should be more, give more awareness to the people about this tribunal. Also, I think it's somehow it's been success to some level, especially with the legal structure in the country. But for, as I mentioned yesterday, also it's a very different meaning for justice to the public. Like different people, they define justice differently. But to find the truth, I think the answer is also with the ECC, the tribunal, and also with of the education and the documentation that we have, and also the evidence from the testimony from the defense, also from the Sleng and Chung Ai. The other many testimony have been shown on this, and so I think maybe this is a bit a challenge, a difficult way to accept the truth, and what is the like truth commission and reconciliation, because nowadays we still have people who still believe like to worship the offering to the Pol Pot and the border in the stronghold, the former stronghold of the Khmer rule. Yeah, so I think would like to strengthen on this, to add on this, like it's very important on the education and also the motive behind this belief, and it's very compulsory also about to study the comparison of the SOAR or the Holocaust, and in order to give more insight, understanding into the different but also the same nature of the behind all this motive, and the people who have what's the right thing. They think what's the right thing to do is what, like to kill people is the right thing to do, or it's very challenging on this topic, but we need to have more educated, more awareness, and more concern to raise a concern on this. So I think I need to continue and even stronger, more on this kind of outreach and education to raise the awareness. So thank you. I would like to just to add more to our panelists on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you all the panelists, Barbara Thimm from the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, Mofidul Hoque from the Liberation War Museum, Konstanty Gebert and Nickey Diamond. Thank you very much for joining us today for the session, and I hope we will still continue the discussion. And today I think there were many points which we can still discuss, and we of course within our project we will have a post-symposium publication, and so we will refer to many of these points, and we will come back to you soon again to invite for cooperation. So thank you very much. We are very honored to have all of you, and I think it's one of a great panel during our post-symposium. And I'd like to remind you that tomorrow We have presentation of 2 museum initiatives in Thailand, and we will discuss dealing with the past in Thailand with 6 October Museum Project initiative, a topic which is not very discussed in Thailand, and also Patani Art Space in Thailand Conflict Zone in the Deep South. It will be represented by its director, who is also of Muslim background. So it's important for us that we are also inclusive and to all the diversity we have of speakers, and so we'd like to invite you. Also, we will have Monk Zarni tomorrow, who will talk. He will have a talk about from Auschwitz to Myanmar, and then a common discussion, and we also discuss like summary of symposium. So I shared the link to join us tomorrow. It starts at 5 p.m. Bangkok time, or 11 a.m. Central European time. So thank you very much for being today, and stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye. Dankeschön. Auf Wiedersehen.
Dankeschön.
Bye bye.